Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, I don't have a good story to tell. I have a series of small stories embedded in a narrative that is much broader than any one person's action. The theme is accountability for a sustainable future. And we are going to be looking at accountability in the context of relationships between two or more parties. And that relationship is built upon the premise of responsibility and roles. We're going to talk about accountability within the context of three recent crises we've been facing. See if I can get to it. Okay. The three are, we know them well. The first being the flooding of New Orleans in 2005. The second being the financial crisis of 2008 and continuing on today. The third, the one that we're currently living in, the one that Phil mentioned, is the oil spill in the Gulf. These three events are threats to the sustainability of our social and ecological systems. They are canaries in a coal mine that we need to take very serious looks at how they were caused. And I would argue that all three of these situations were the result of the failure of parties, people, being accountable for their actions. They were also a failure of other parties failing to hold those people accountable for their actions. They were accountability breakdowns, and we need to do something about this. The accountability relationship. X is accountable to Y. Y is the person or the party to which accounts are rendered. And in that, they have expectations over X. X, in turn, has an accountability, a relationship with Y. They have to provide evidence, data, behaviors, showing that they've met those expectations. This is the basis of an accountability relationship. In a democratic society, the basic contract is between elected representatives and the citizenry. That's an accountability relationship. In market forces, the accountability relationship is between the owners of capital, the owners of businesses and corporations, and consumers. That's an accountability relationship. And administratively, in the context of power dynamics, we have a knowledge creation. We have accountability in terms of professional expertise. There are some members of our society that know more than others about certain things. We also have expectations between bosses and subordinates, leaders and followers. And lastly, we have relationships between collaborators and peers, between friends and family. Moving to the case of Katrina. We all know it well. Early September 2005, Hurricane Katrina hits. Category 4 hurricane. Predicted for many decades. The levees broke. Why did they break? A failure of accountability. The Army Corps of Engineers built those levees many decades prior. They said, well, we built it for a Category 3 hurricane, but not 4 or 5. Okay? After that, we're not responsible for them. They said, well, there are local water boards. Citizen councils responsible for each little parcel of levee in their neighborhoods. They're responsible. They're responsible to upkeep the levee. But citizens are saying, well, no, we're looking at this as a member of our community, as a vital piece of our community. We look at it as a recreation area. We're not responsible for these levees. So who is accountable for this? Elected representatives, the mayor of New Orleans, the governor of Louisiana, the president of the United States, and their administrative apparatus and government, state, local, federal governments. Everyone's looking at each other. See the gap here. And what about the professional experts, the emergency management professionals, the engineers who are saying, listen, folks, this is going to happen. This was not a surprise. And this, my friends, is why this is a canary in the coal mine. If we think about global climate change, we think about rising sea levels, these questions are going to dog us. The financial crisis, beginning in 2008, we're still in the midst of it. Okay? Began in the mid-2000s or the 1990s with the deregulation of our financial markets and the creation of innovative mortgage products called derivatives, okay, which is basically an insurance policy against someone defaulting on a mortgage. When Alan Greenspan, then the Federal Reserve Chief, presented to Congress about these derivatives, he said, don't worry about it. The market will self-regulate. It will take care of itself. Don't worry about this. Fast forward 10 years later. Mortgages are being handed out like they're candy. Insurance policies on those candies are being meted out. What happens? The system collapses. Who's responsible? Who's accountable to that? Is it the elected officials? Is it the President of the United States, his administration, that deregulated those markets? Is it his political appointees, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who 10 years later sat before that same Congress and said, I was wrong. Markets cannot self-regulate, obviously. Okay? Was it the companies, the businesses who gave out all those faulty loans? Or those that traded in the mortgage derivatives? Or was it the professionals, the investment bankers, the people that we beholden to say, you take care of this, you know best? They all failed us, folks. As well as consumers, the consumers of these loans. Lastly, we're familiar with this. This is the sheer ram pin that failed in the Deepwater Horizon. Okay? Industry experts suggested that these systems should have at least 2 of these, redundant systems. This oil well had 1. Okay? And it failed us. Who's accountable for that? You see a lot of that now. Oh, it's the federal government, okay, with a deregulated industry, okay, with a stripped-down regulatory framework. Right? Who's accountable? Is it the companies? We see a lot of finger-pointing at BP, and rightly so. But what about us? As Phil reminds us, we're all based on petroleum. We all depend on it. Are we accountable? Yeah, we are. And what about the professional expertise, the engineers, those that we put a lot of faith that they're going to take care of us? Another pattern of system breakdown. That perhaps this Shangri-La of professional expertise isn't enough. It isn't enough. I end with 4 points. The first being, we need to match our accountability systems to the scale of the threat, of the challenge. You can't have local water councils responsible for a regional-wide levy system. We have some tough decisions to make about local control, regional control, federal control, and international control. Those are the difficult questions. Second, we need to rely on less of industries to self-regulate themselves. The last 2 decades have been the era of self-regulation. But markets do not self-regulate, folks, as these cases attest. They need to be regulated, and they need to be held accountable, because industry regulating itself obviously is not working in these cases. Third, we need to place stronger emphasis on professional accountability, and that's a difficult question for folks like myself who train people in the professions. But those who should know better need to speak up and speak out and act. And when they see malfeasance, they need to speak up and do something about it. Lastly, we need to be accountable to future generations. We need to provide ways for future generations to hold us accountable for our acts. And how we do that we need to be up to the task for that, because that is the critical question of our era. Thank you.